Hello everybody and welcome to today's FSSC 22000 webinar on version 7. I'm Neil Mulholland, I'm the FSSC Integrity Programme Director. Let's take a look at today's agenda. So we're going to have an introduction to FSSC 22000. We'll talk about version 7 and what the motivation was for changing it. We'll talk about the main changes to the scheme and we'll also focus on the upgrade process. Just in terms of the practicalities for today, so you are all muted. If you have a question to ask, please register it in the Q&A box, and I see that some of you have already done so, so thank you for those. This webinar is going to be recorded, and the recording and presentations will all be shared via email directly after today's webinar. I'm joined in the studio today by Elsabe Matthee, who is the FSSC Technical Director. Hello, Elsabe.
Hi, Neil.
Thank you. And also joining us online will be Kelly Mulholland, who is the FSSC Technical Manager, Quality and Safety.
Hi, all.
Thanks, Kelly. And without further ado, I'd like to pass over to Elsabe, who will take you through the rest of the presentation and webinar for today.
Thank you, Neil. And hello to everyone who's joined us today. As said, I'm going to start with a short introduction on FSSC 22000. So why should organizations choose for FSSC 22000 certification? FSSC 22000 provides a framework for a robust and effective food safety management system with the emphasis on management systems, because we utilize existing ISO standards like ISO 22000, which is fully included in our scheme. One of the benefits is that it aligns with the ISO harmonized structure, which then facilitates integrated management system audits, as well as the implementation of an IMS within an organization. It is a science-based standard developed by international experts and therefore, we believe, also reliable. On this note, the Foundation also sits on the working groups for standards development with ISO as a liaison. For example, we are busy with the review of ISO 22000 at the moment. The scheme is also GFSI recognized and has been for a long time, and this also contributes to the global acceptance of our scheme. And as part of our governance structure and assurance activities, we have developed a robust integrity program to ensure that our certification is accepted and robust, and that it can be trusted in the market. This slide provides you with an overview of the FSSC 22000 scheme. Now, we are very pleased to say that we currently have more than 40,000 FSSC 22000 certificates. And whilst it's not the focus of the scheme, it does go towards showing the acceptance of the scheme in the market and the trust that people place in our certification. In order to deliver the scheme, we partner with more than 170 CBs and ABs supported by our FSSC team. We also work closely with international bodies such as ISO, GFSI, the global ACI, that was previously known as IAF and ILAC, UNIDO and WPO. And then at the bottom of this slide, you can also see the multiple sectors that the scheme covers, from feed and animal food production all the way through to retail and wholesale. And as some of you might know, we also have a development program designed for SMEs and also for those organizations who are not fully ready yet for third-party certification. And the purpose of the development program is really focused on food safety. To this end, we recently published a set of guidance documents for the program to assist industry with the implementation and application of the program. These guidance documents are available as a free download from our website, so please do go and have a look. And let's now briefly look at who manages FSSC 22000. The Foundation is the owner of the scheme, and as you know, the scheme is a food safety management system certification scheme, and our aim is to deliver trust and impact beyond certification. Both our schemes, so FSSC 22000 and FSSC 24000, as well as the development program, are governed by an independent board of stakeholders supported by the advisory committees. This ensures transparency and independency and makes sure that we have a balanced approach that takes the needs of the consumer goods industry into consideration. And as you also can see, the scheme has evolved over time. We started back in 2010 with version 1, and over the last 16 years, it has developed, and we are now today on version 7 of the scheme. Now, this slide provides you with an overview of the structure of the FSSC 22000 scheme. The normative documents related to the scheme includes ISO 22000 for food safety management systems, the sector-specific PRP standards, and the additional FSSC 22000 requirements. Organizations also need to remember to refer to the BOSS decision list and our scheme interpretation articles, as they are also mandatory documents. In relation to version 7, the PRP requirements have changed from ISO technical specifications to the new ISO 22002 standard. And I will elaborate on that a little bit further as part of my presentation. Changes have also been made to the FSSC additional requirements, which Kelly will discuss further in her section. Now, in order for the scheme to be successful and robust, a strong governance structure is required. The FSSC Integrity Program is the ongoing monitoring system of our licensed CBs to ensure compliance with our scheme requirements, leading to reliable audits and consistency in third-party certification. This in turn drives trust and confidence in the certification process, leading to a reduced demand for additional second-party audits. The IP program covers various activities, as you can see on the slide, including performance evaluation of new and existing CBs, certification integrity assessments such as office assessments and desk reviews, license management, brand protection, and customer support. Knowledge management is another key component, and we do this through webinars, trainings, but also mentoring of new CBs as part of our onboarding program. But let's get to version 7. As you all know, and probably have seen, we published the scheme last Friday on the 1st of May, and I'm going to look briefly with you as to the main reasons for the change. Now, the main drivers for the change include incorporating the new ISO 22002 series for prerequisite programs, and this is also a normative document in our scheme, alignment of the scheme with the GFSI Benchmarking Requirements of 2024, strengthening requirements to help organizations meet the SDGs, providing a more defined structure for the division of food chain subcategories, and we also took the opportunity to make editorial changes and amendments as part of our continuous improvement process. Now, one of the bigger changes includes the introduction of the new ISO 22002 series that was published last year in July and replaces the ISO TS 22002 series. So it is the prerequisite programs that has changed. This new standard defines and standardizes requirements for establishing, implementing and maintaining PRPs throughout the food, feed and the packaging supply chain with the purpose of assisting in controlling food safety hazards. And this is in conjunction with ISO 22000 Clause 8.2. It establishes one common PRP standard, and then it has additional sector-specific parts. And this simplifies implementation for those multi-sector organizations out there, typically meaning more standardized PRP structures and clearer audit expectations. For some sectors, however, it could result in increased or more defined requirements based on what is defined in Part 100. Now, the new ISO 22002 structure, or the PRP structure, is designed to harmonize shared PRPs in Part 100 And Part 100 applies across all of the sectors, thereby reducing duplication across the sector parts and making it easier for organizations to apply a consistent PRP framework. For example, if we look at a catering company, then Part 100 and also ISO 22002 for catering would apply. Likewise, if we have an organization that does food and packaging manufacturing, then Part 100, ISO 22002 Part 1 for food manufacturing, and ISO 22002 Part 4 for packaging would apply. You will also notice that there is no Part 3 on the slide, and this is because this sector PRP for farming is still under development. Also new to the series is ISO 22002 Part 7, and that is the new PRP standard for retail and wholesale. In version 7, this will replace the PAS 221. Now, when we look further into the impact of the change, you will notice that clause numbers have changed, meaning that organizations will have to adapt their PRPs, including their documentation, to align with this new structure, meaning Part 100 plus the relevant sector part or parts. As mentioned before, Part 100 contains those PRP requirements that are common across all of the sectors. And then the sector-specific parts only include those requirements over and above what is defined in Part 100. For example, when we look at this extract from ISO 22002 Part 1, so the food manufacturing one, you will see that for clause 4.2 on environment, only the requirements as defined in Part 100 apply. However, when we look at clause 4.3 on construction and layout, you will see that the requirements in Part 100 apply, plus additional requirements on drains and drainage direction. Now, in order to demonstrate how the clause numbers have changed, an example is displayed on the screen on the ISO TS 22002 Part 1, so the food manufacturing technical specification, compared to the new ISO 22002 Part 1 and Part 100. Now, as you will see, clauses 4, 5 and 6 has kept the same numbering, but with a slight change in the wording. Clause 7 on waste disposal is now clause 8 and includes food loss and waste management and recycling requirements as well. And likewise, clauses 8 and 9 on equipment and purchasing of materials now shifts to clauses 9 and 10 respectively. Now, as mentioned before, Part 100 only includes those PRP requirements that are applicable across all of the sectors. So, for example, when we look at clause 14 in the technical specification on rework, you will see when you look in the column on the right-hand side that it is not included in Part 100, as rework is not something that is applicable across all of the sectors. It will then be included in the relevant sector part, for example, under clause 17 in ISO 22002 Part 1. In some cases, requirements were also removed. So when you look at product recall procedures, that is included in the ISO TS under clause 15, you will see that it is no longer included in the new PRP standard. And this is because this requirement is already covered in ISO 22000, clause 895. Now, this concludes my initial presentation on the changes or the reasons for the change in ISO in version 7. And before I hand over to Kelly, we would want to take this opportunity to also get your input on an environmental addendum. And the reasoning behind this is that we've had some requests to add on an addendum that focuses on environment. It would be a voluntary addendum that could be applied to both of our schemes, so both to FSSC 22000 and to FSSC 24000. And in case when it is added onto the regular audit for FSSC 22000, it would then focus on food loss and waste data, for example, and also how that correlates to GHG emissions. So we would like to take a couple of minutes and do a quick poll where we would ask you 3 questions, and we would really appreciate your feedback. We will not discuss the output of the poll during this webinar today because we want to make sure we have enough time for Kelly to go through the changes with you. But you should now see the first poll question coming up on your screen. And the question is, do you think there is a need for a voluntary FSSC environmental addendum? So it's a yes or no question. So if you could please either select yes or no. Okay, we can. Yeah, so we see that there's some responses coming in. So we'll give it another couple of seconds just to maximize the feedback that we get. Okay, so we are now on about 70%, so I think we can move to the next poll question. And the next question would be, should we do this addendum if it should include A, data collection and verification, B, basic environmental principles, or C, that includes both, so both data collection and basic environmental principles. So if you could please select either A, B, or C as an answer to this poll question, please. Yeah. And I've just been informed that we have 6,000 people online today. So yeah, that's a huge amount. We're very grateful for everybody joining, which also makes this a great opportunity for us to collect some input and feedback from those attending. Okay, so we're on 4,000 people who have voted. Maybe we'll give it another couple of seconds. Okay, all right. And then the third question, which is the last one, and this is an open question. If there are any other topics that you think would be useful to include in an environmental addendum, and this is a free text, but you don't have to write a huge amount of text, just some main thoughts would be great. So we'll give it a minute or two for people to just put in their comments for poll question number 3. Okay. Yeah, in the interest of time, we will also keep this third question open. As I said, we are not going to discuss the results of the poll today. This was merely getting your input. So thank you very much for those of you who have answered the questions. So I'm going to hand it back over to Neil for the next part of the presentation.
Thank you for that, Elsabe. Very informative, and thank you all for taking the time to vote in the poll. So I'm now going to hand over to Kelly, who will take you through the main changes in the scheme. So Kelly, over to you. Thank you.
Great, thanks very much, Neil, and thanks, Elsabe, and look forward to seeing the results of that poll survey later on. But great, let's get going and having a look at the main changes to the scheme in version 7. So part 2 of the scheme, which addresses the requirements for organizations to be audited, is what we will mostly focus on during today's webinar, with some key points from other parts as well. However, for a full overview of the main additions in the scheme, please refer to the main changes documents that we've published on our website under the tab titled Scheme Documents, and then refer to the section called Additional Information. And here you will find the main changes version, which highlights the additions in version 7 in red. So we will now go on to part 1 of the scheme, which is on the scheme overview. And in this section, we will cover the scope of the scheme, food chain categories and sectors that the scheme covers. So that is what is covered in part 1. And then having a look at the scheme structure has not changed, and it still includes 5 parts, 2 appendices, and 5 annexes. Regarding the scope of certification, no changes to the scope's coverage has occurred between version 6 and version 7, and the subcategories are still as displayed on this slide. And this covers sectors from pre-process handling of plant products, such as packhouses, to the production of biochemicals, such as food additives and food supplements. Within Table 1, which details the food chain categories or sectors covered by the scheme, the normative documents applicable to each food chain category has been updated to align with the inclusion of the new ISO 22002 series for PRPs, which Elsabe mentioned earlier. So this is the part of the scheme where you as certified organizations or organizations seeking certification can look to see what normative documents applies to your sector. An additional table 1 on sub-categories has also been included within this part of the scheme, which I'll discuss in a bit more detail in some of the upcoming slides. And in addition to this, we've also made some editorial changes, and we've made further clarifications and amendments as part of continuous improvement of the scheme as well, and for easier usability. And this is not only for part 1, but throughout the scheme document itself. So on this slide, you can see, this slide and the following slide that I'll display, you can see the sub-category classification that has been added into the scheme. So sub-categories have been added in to ensure that the auditors have the necessary competency to sub-category level relevant to the scope of the certified organization they are auditing. And this is to ensure that a robust audit can be delivered by an auditor with the necessary process knowledge. So CBs have previously defined these sub-categories themselves in the past. However, to ensure consistency and harmonization between CBs, we've introduced formally defined sub-categories within the scheme. I won't spend much time going through this in detail with you during this webinar, as these sub-categories applies to the CB's management of auditor competency mostly, and does not apply to certificates or licensing or accreditation. However, it should also be noted that there are only sub-categories defined in the scheme for the following food chain categories. So for C0, for animal primary conversion, such as slaughterhouses; for C1, for for processing of perishable animal products; for C4, processing of ambient stable products; and then as displayed on the next slide, also for category I, for the production of packaging material, and for category K, the production of biochemicals. So these subcategories have been further divided into sub-subcategories as they have a broad range of products with different technologies included within them. And we want to ensure that auditors delivering the audits has the necessary competency for these different products and different technologies. You will, however, note on the current slide that there are no sub-subcategories defined for some of the food chain categories, as displayed on the slide at present. So that is for B3, C2, C3, D, E, F1, F2, and G. And this is because competency is evaluated at subcategory level for these food chain categories. But next, let us move on to part 2, which is where I will spend most of my time in today's webinar. So part 2 of the scheme describes the scheme requirements against which licensed certification bodies will audit the food safety management system of the organization to achieve or maintain FSSC 22000 certification. So this section defines that the organizations are audited against ISO 22000 and 2018 for the food safety management system requirements, for ISO 22002 2025 series on PRPs, as well as the FSSC 22000 additional requirements. And this is together along with any BOS decisions that has been made in the BOS the Board of Stakeholders decision list, and any scheme interpretation articles that have been published by the Foundation. So within version 7, as Elsabe has already mentioned and discussed in detail earlier in this webinar, the new ISO standards for PRPs has been included within version 7. And then we've also clarified in this part of the scheme that any amendments to ISO 22000 issued by ISO, such as the one on climate change, are also covered by the scheme and are therefore auditable. But now let us move on to discussing the changes FSSC has made to the FSSC 22000 additional requirements. Firstly, we've incorporated the version 6 BOS decision number 4 from March 2024 into version 7. And this included updating the requirement on laboratory analysis used for the verification and or validation of parameters critical to food safety, which included that the analysis shall be performed in accordance with the applicable requirements of ISO IEC 17025. Also good to mention that FSSC has already published a scheme interpretation article in June 2024 on laboratory analysis, which provides further clarification to organizations on the laboratory analysis requirements and the implementation thereof. And if you're not familiar with the scheme interpretation article or the one on quality control, we highly recommend you go and download them from our website, as they are mandatory already with version 6. Then we have made some updates to the FSSC 22000 additional requirements linked to the GFSI Benchmarking Requirements of 2024. So let's start off with the update made to the specification requirement included under 2.5.1. So organizations need to ensure that the microbiological, physical, chemical, and allergenic specifications used for food safety purposes are based on appropriate scientific principles when relevant legislation is absent, such as on scientific results or on international standards. Then next, based on the GFSI benchmarking requirement updates, we've updated the requirements on food defense and on food fraud mitigation. And this is to ensure that the assessments, so the threat assessments and vulnerability assessments, and the plans, the food defense plan or food fraud mitigation plans, are developed and maintained by personnel who have the appropriate knowledge and competence to undertake them. And then with regards to food safety and quality culture, senior management shall provide sufficient resources to maintain a positive food safety and quality culture, and a demonstrable commitment from all personnel to the production and safe handling of food shall be available, as all personnel shall be committed to the production and safe handling of food within the organization. Now we'll move on to some other updates made to the additional requirements unrelated to GFSI benchmarking requirements. So to start with, we have reduced the food defense and food fraud mitigation requirements within the additional requirements. However, this is due to them being incorporated and included within the new ISO PRP standard 22002 Part 100 that Elsabe mentioned earlier. So these requirements are still included within the scheme, and the overall requirements has not been reduced. It's just that in which normative document it is present that has changed. We've also updated the clause references throughout the FSSC additional requirements to align with this new PRP series. So please make sure to also check these changes in references throughout. Now for some specific updates that were made based on feedback from stakeholders, as well as for continuous improvement of the scheme and for global food safety. You will see that the artwork management and print control requirements now applies to all organizations that print labels and materials, and no longer only applies to Category I organizations. And this is because many food and feed manufacturers also print their own materials in-house, and therefore they also need to have control over these processes. And with regards to allergen management, we've updated the following requirement to apply for pet food producers now as well, and not only to animal feed producers. So it now indicates that where there is no allergen-related legislation for the country of sale pertaining to animal feed or pet food, this section of the scheme requirements, so the requirements on allergen management, may be indicated as not applicable unless a claim relating to an allergen status has been made on the animal feed or pet food. So, for example, if there was allergenicity claims such as hyperallergenic, in which case these requirements on allergen management would then still apply where a claim has been made. Then with regards to the PRP verification additional requirement, which relates to the organization needing to establish, implement, and maintain routine site inspections and PRP checks, this requirement now also applies to the catering and food service industry and to the retail and wholesale sector. So overall, the only food chain category that this requirement does not apply to now is food chain category F2 for trading and brokering. And this is because this sector undertakes administration activities only. And then next, with regards to the product and design and the product design and development additional requirement linked to shelf life validation and ongoing verification, here we've clarified in the scheme that this requirement applies to specific food chain subcategories, including B3, C, D, and K. And this is the requirement that indicates the need to conduct production and shelf life trials to validate product formulation and processes are capable of producing safe products that meets customer requirements, and that a process for ongoing shelf life verification shall be in place, and that is at a frequency based on risk. So again, to confirm, this requirement has been specified to be applicable to food chain categories B3 for pre-process handling of plant products, C, food manufacturing, D, animal feed production, as well as category K for biochemicals. Then next, the additional requirement 2514 was previously about the health status of personnel linked to food chain category D, so for animal feed production. However, this has been removed from the additional requirements as it's now sufficiently addressed within ISO 22002 series. Again, this requirement is still covered within the scheme. It's just under a different normative document. So within its place, the version 6 BOSS decision number 3 from March 2024 has now been added into version 7 as additional requirement 2514, relating to the organization needing to establish, implement, and maintain appropriate procedures and systems to ensure the traceability of all edible parts of the carcass is maintained until the carcass is deemed fit for human consumption. Again, this was added, or as a reminder, this was added into the version 6 BOSS decision list to meet GFSI benchmarking requirements. Then regarding the additional requirement on food loss and waste, we've clarified that the food loss and waste objectives shall be supported by clear and measurable targets with defined timelines. And this is to further support the reduction of food loss and waste and continued contribution to meeting the Sustainable Development Goals. Then with regards to the additional requirements for organizations with multi-site certification, we've updated to indicate that these requirements now also apply to food chain category B3 for pre-process handling of plant products, so such as pack houses. And this is when the B3 organization undergoes multi-site certification. And this is also due to the fact that this food chain category can now also undergo multi-site certification from version 7 of the scheme onwards. Then we are pleased to announce that we have incorporated a new requirement under product design and development. And so we're very pleased as the foundation to be able to announce this to industry. And this requirement applies to all organizations that design primary packaging and packaging material. So the main aim of this requirement is to further support food loss and waste reduction. And this requirement was developed with the support of WPO, the World Packaging Organization, for which FSSC is an associate member, and AIP, the Australasian Institute of Packaging, and is based on aspects of the AIP Safe Food Packaging Design Principles that have been globalized by WPO. So let's look at the requirement in more detail. So organizations that design primary packaging and packaging material, so not only category I organizations, but all organizations that design primary packaging and packaging material shall take the following principles into consideration when developing new products or making changes to packaging. So these principles include the effective containment and protection of product from spoilage and damage throughout all steps in the supply chain, to preserve and extend the shelf life of the product being packed, to minimize food loss and waste, as well as clear communication to consumers on how to handle, store, and prepare food. And where any of these principles that we've mentioned are incorporated, it shall not negatively impact on food safety. Again, this requirement is requiring organizations to consider these principles within the design and that they need to be able to demonstrate that they've considered it. However, it is not required to implement all the principles where it is not viable. Keeping in mind that requirements from other parts of the scheme that connect with certain of these principles, for example, communication on handling, storage, and preparation of food, is still mandatory to implement. And the intent of this requirement is for organizations to consider how they can design their packaging to reduce food loss and waste whilst not compromising on food safety. And for guidance on how to implement this requirement, please refer to the AIP Safe Food Packaging Design Criteria link included on this slide, which you will be able to access once these slides have been shared with you after the webinar. And still in relation to the additional requirement that was on the previous slide, so this new requirement 2513G, as I've mentioned, is based on the Safe Food Packaging Design Criteria Guidelines developed by AIP in conjunction with RMIT University and Food Waste Australia, again, which has been globalized by WPO. And you can scan the QR code on the slide that's currently displayed to access these guidelines as well. But a reminder that our scheme requirement only covers certain aspects of these principles and not all of them. So please keep this in mind when reviewing these guidelines. And then next, we will move on to some of the updates made in Part 3 of the scheme, which relates to the certification process. And as I've mentioned, these are only some of the key updates, so we do highly recommend that you go and review the main change documents in the scheme in full to see all the additions and changes that have been made to the scheme. So let's start off by having a look at audit duration. As a reminder, the audit duration for FSSC 22000 is based on DS plus TFSSC, and DS is based on the audit duration calculation included within ISO 22003 Part 1, and is what the duration would be for an ISO 22000 audit. TFSSC is the duration that is added on top of the DS to make up the FSSC 22000 audit duration. So FSSC has changed the TFSSC value in version 7, and this is to allow for further flexibility in minimum audit duration for smaller organizations and in certain sectors, while still ensuring certification integrity. So TFSSC shall be calculated as displayed on this slide now. Therefore, 0.5 audited days or 4 working hours when the company has less than 100 full-time employees, FTE, and a maximum 2 HACCP studies, 1 audit a day, 8 working hours when the company has 100 to 249 FTE and maximum 2 HACCP studies, and 1.5 audit a day, 12 working hours when the organization has 250 FTE or more, or 3 HACCP studies or more. So some organizations might therefore experience a reduction in audit duration for version 7 as compared to version 6. And this change makes the minimum basic FSSC 22000 audit duration 1.5, 2, or 2.5 audited days, depending on the TFSSC value, as DS is always a minimum of 1 audited day. However, for categories C, food manufacturing, D, animal feed production, and K, biochemicals, the minimum audit duration shall never be less than 2 days in order to meet the GFSI benchmarking requirement. So that is just the brief explanation on the update to audit duration linked to TFSSC. But we've also updated the exemption rule for audit duration for small organizations. So here you will see that for organizations that have less than 20 FTE, and so 19 or less, and maximum 2 HACCP studies, further reductions are allowed to a minimum audit duration of 1.5 days for all audit types and all audit categories, all food chain categories. So we've therefore removed the requirement for the process to be considered a simple process, and we've also increased the HACCP studies from 1 to 2 HACCP studies. and this allows for more flexibility in audit duration for smaller organizations. However, please still keep in mind that the certification body shall ensure that the audit duration allows for an effective audit based on audit objectives, scope of the organization, and the specific audit needs, and also ensuring that it covers the full FSSC 22000 requirements. And therefore, audit duration may also be increased, and CBs can decide to not apply the exemption requirement depending on the complexity, the scope, and the specific audit needs. So the audit duration is calculated on minimum durations, and CBs can increase them where the need arises to meet audit objectives, as well as to ensure an effective and a robust audit is delivered. And then next, we're going to be having a look at full remote audits and off-site activities. So in relation to full remote audits, where the requirements of the full remote audit addendum are met, a full remote audit may be conducted as a result of a serious event. And with regards to this requirement, we've updated it to also indicate that it is only allowed to conduct 2 consecutive full remote audits at an organization. Thereafter, an on-site audit is required. And this is to ensure that the integrity of the certification is maintained. Then with regards to the audit duration for off-site manufacturing, processing, or service activities, there is now only one option for audit duration calculation, except in the case of a campus-style setup. So let's look at this in a little bit more detail. So where organizations that are off-site manufacturing, processing, or service activities are taking place, the audit duration of the satellite site, so the off-site activity, shall be calculated separately from the main site, in which case a 50% audit time reduction of DS may be applied when calculating the audit duration for the satellite site, keeping in mind TFSSC still applies on top of the calculated DS. And only in the case of a campus-style setup may the combined parameters, so the combined number of full-time employees and the combined HACCP studies of the entire campus-style setup be used to calculate the audit duration. Then let's have a look at what are the changes with regards to multi-site certification. So as mentioned earlier, food chain category B3 for pre-process handling of plant products, for example, pack houses, is now eligible for multi-site certification when the relevant requirements have been met. We've also clarified how to calculate the central function audit duration. However, good to note that the requirement itself or the intent of the requirement has not changed. And we also clarified the audit reporting requirements for multi-site organizations. And then lastly, in relation to unannounced audits, it is now mandatory to agree on the blackout days in advance between the certification body and the certified organization, whereas previously it was only a recommendation. And we've also clarified how a CB needs to proceed in the case the site is not in operation at all when the auditor arrives on site for the unannounced audit. So this concludes my brief presentation to you with regards to the main changes. However, again, we do highly recommend that you review the full main change documents published on our website. So I'll now have a look at the upgrade process from version 6 to version 7, or parts thereof. So this slide gives you an overview from the development of version 7 to when version 7 audits will commence. And version 7 of the FSSC 22000 scheme was published on May 1st, so Friday last week, including the main changes version, and there will be a 12-month transition window to allow for organizations as well as certification bodies to prepare for the new version. So the upgrade process for version 7 is very similar to the upgrade process for version 6, including the 12-month transition window. And audits against version 6 are only allowed to be delivered up until the 30th of April 2027. Upgrade audits against version 7 shall be conducted from the 1st of May 2027 until the 30th of April 2028. And all upgrade audit packs and version 7 certificates are required to have been uploaded on the FSSC assurance platform by the certification body within 2 months of the last day of the upgrade audit. And therefore, CBs shall have completed the version 7 upgrade process in the assurance platform by no later than the 30th of June 2028. Also, all remaining version 6 certificates will automatically be set to withdrawn in our platform after the 30th of June 2028 and would then no longer be visible on the public register of certified organizations on our website. It is important to note that it is both the CB and the certified organization's responsibility to ensure that you undergo your upgrade audit within the required timeframes. Then the audit duration calculations, as I've mentioned, for certified organizations need to be reviewed in line with the new audit duration calculation of version 7 linked to TFSSC. And the CB shall either issue a new contract to version 7 to the certified organization or version 7 addendum to the existing version 6 contract, taking into account the audit duration as per version 7. And the audit duration requirements as per the scheme version 7 shall be applied for all audits from the 1st of May 2027 onwards. So for example, if the organization is undergoing their upgrade audit during a surveillance audit, then the CB shall calculate the surveillance audit duration as per the new version 7 scheme requirements. No additional increase in audit duration for the upgrade audit is specified by the Foundation. However, the CB can define an increase where deemed necessary, depending on the complexity and the scope of the organization as well. That concludes what I wanted to mention to you with regards to the upgrade process, but please do go and read that document in full as well. And then lastly, let's briefly touch on translations of the version 7 scheme. So we're pleased to announce that we have published translations in the following languages: English, Chinese, Japanese, Portuguese, Spanish, and Turkish. And we published these at the same time as publishing the official English version of our scheme. A reminder that in the case of translations of the scheme documents, the English version is the official and binding version. And good to note that these translations are available on the schemes documents page of our website and is freely available for download. So on that note, I'll hand back over to Neil for the Q&A portion of today's webinar. Thanks, Neil.
Thanks, Kelly. I'm pleased to say that there have been a great deal of questions that have come in. We're not going to have time to answer all of them, unfortunately, but I've tried to curate a few that I think will answer the majority of the questions that have been raised. So, first question is for you, Elsabe. And it says, it's from Rolf, and it says, Elsabe mentioned that the BOS documents and interpretation documents are also mandatory. Does this apply to guidance docs also, e.g. equipment management?
Okay, that's a good question. So thanks for posting that. The guidance documents are not mandatory documents. They are there to assist organizations in terms of understanding the requirements and what is good practice. So no, it's not mandatory, whereas the BOS decision list and the scheme interpretation articles are.
Thank you, Elsabe. Question for you, Kelly, if I may, and it relates back to the translations of the standard. Will the scheme be translated into French?
So at this point in time, the languages that we've translated into are the ones that I've displayed on the screen.
Is there any plan to do any further translations in time?
We will have to touch base further with the Marcoms department on that, but at the moment, it's the ones that we have we indicated today.
Super, thank you. Elsabe, a question for you from Laurent. Do already certificated sites need to start internal audits against version 7 requirements, including ISO 22002-100 and applicable ISO 22002-X PRP standards before the 1st of May 2027?
It's an interesting question because the short answer to that is you should start preparing. The but to that is it depends on when your next audit is due. Because if the next audit to the scheme will be to version 6 still, then your internal audit needs to be to version 6 requirements. But companies would need to start preparing anyway for version 7. So it might be a little bit of an overlap, but yeah, it would depend on when your next audit is due.
Thank you. Kelly, one for you, if I may. It's a question from Mark. Will there be an updated contract for V7 and will the audit duration change?
So yes, CBs are required to issue a new contract to version 7 or an addendum to the version 6 contract. In terms of the audit duration, we've made changes in the audit duration calculation in version 7, specifically relating to TFSSC, like I've mentioned. So your audit duration would need to be recalculated by your CB. It doesn't necessarily mean that there will be a change in your duration. Smaller organizations might actually find a reduction in their duration potentially. It's likely, however, that if we think about the offsite activities and offsite manufacturers, they might see a slight increase in duration. But again, this will depend on multiple factors. So the CVs will need to advise you in this regard, depending on your specific organization.
Great. Thanks, Kelly. Elsabe, one for you. And a number of people asked this question, so it's clearly a very hot topic. Will version 7 be benchmarked by GFSI by May 2027?
Yes, well, so maybe to put this into context a little bit so that people understand the process, typically we have 12 months from application to GFSI to achieve the recognition, and it typically takes the full 12 months. So we have already applied to GFSI in April, so we are already in process. So if all goes to plan, then come April next year, we should have our benchmarking. I think it might also be good to add that GFSI has changed their process, the benchmarking process. So it has been streamlined, and we do not have to submit evidence of accredited certificates per subcategory as part of the application anymore. So that helps the process. So we are confident that we should have it by April next year.
Good news, and I'm sure everybody is quite relieved to hear that. A follow-on question to that from Barbara about the category F2. Is that also going to be recognised by GFSI?
Yeah, so that's the traders and brokers subcategory. And at the moment, we have not submitted it for the GFSI benchmarking. And the main reason for that is because they do not accept, GFSI do not accept multi-site certification for F2. We currently have organizations that has F2 multi-sites, and that is really the reason why we're not including it in the benchmarking. Sure. But I would like to add that because all of the subcategories or the categories are included in our scheme, it's one scheme, we basically manage and govern the scheme exactly the same. Yep. It's purely because of the multi-site factor that it's not being included.
Okay, thank you. I think that answers the question. I think I've got time for probably one more question, and let me find a tricky one for you, Kelly, to answer. Okay, so there's a lot of words in this question, so I'll do my best. It's a question from Rajesh. Will the new requirement relating to the design of primary packaging and packaging materials, 2513.G, be applicable only to Category I certified organisations, or will food manufacturers be audited on this requirement for packaging designed on their behalf?
Thanks, Neil. It's a great question. So it's not only for Category I organizations, it's also for food manufacturers that design the primary packaging and packaging materials. So they will also be audited against these requirements. And again, it's for both new products that they're developing as well as for any changes to packaging that they're making. But no, it doesn't only apply to Category I.
Thank you. I think that's it was a very comprehensive question. I think that's a very comprehensive answer. We are at the top of the hour, so I'd just like to say thank you to all of you for participating. My thanks to our presenters today, Elsabe and Kelly. I hope the information has been informative. You will all be sent a copy of the recording of the webinar and the content of the webinar as well. So it's goodbye from us here in the studio. Thank you.